many of you have been tuning in as I've been doing some church history. And some of the calls are wonderful. Here's a caller from Hayes, North Carolina. There's no numbers attached to this, but they were listening on Roku, and they said, I was just wondering with the Catholic Church, if they spend all their time praying to Mary, why do they need Peter? See, I told you, you cannot ask more questions than I do on any given subject, because I'll go through the what I call the tediousness of asking, why is this and why is that? And you eventually you realize something, that the great design, pretty much just the way, the best way to explain this is the same way we see in God's book, where God revealed himself as Jehovah, as Yahweh. And then the Jews treated that sacred tetragrammaton as too holy to speak, so in much of the writing, you'll see Yod Yod Yahya, or the vowel points of Adonai under Yahweh, so you cannot pronounce the name, because then the name towards the Targums becomes so holy that we can't say the name, and we don't even say the name of God, we say the name. Or if you find some writing, you'll find where God will not be written out, but it'll be God G-D, so we don't write. It's all of these things that God didn't intend, but man's interpretation of these things then becomes. So you go back into the Catholic Church and you find the same thing. The worship of Mary, if anybody studies Mariology, the worship of Mary is not a singular phenomenon. You have to go back far enough. Now, if you believe, for example, in the lost drama of the disciples, where they go off to the south of France, which, by the way, for people who haven't been there, you hear that and you say, oh yeah, I read that somewhere. But if you were ever in that land, you'd shake your head, because everywhere you look, you see Mary, Joseph, and you think, well, this must be an extremely religious community, a very Christian community. But they're not talking about Joseph, Mary's husband Joseph, and that's pretty clear from a lot of the things that we can see in the surroundings in the south of France. You just have to go to some of the cathedrals and look around, some of the landmarks. But everywhere, you've got Mary as the key pivotal figure there. And there's no doubt, when you trace back that history, there's no doubt in my mind that if a person believes that she and others traveled to the south of France and then others navigated now north and south from there as well, or migrated, there is no doubt that all of those people who were in the upper room on the day of Pentecost, who then went out after the Spirit was poured out and they went out, there's no doubt that all of these people had the dunamis of God through the Spirit, just like Peter saying, silver and gold have I not to the man begging alms, but such as I have, in the name of Jesus, get up and walk. And he straightway gets up and he walks. There's no doubt that all of these people were dynamited with some incredible power beyond the realm of just spiritual understanding, that everywhere they went, either miracles or signs, and these were done to denote that these people had received power. It's the way the church was born. So it's no mystery then that as Mary is recognized in that territory, she might have done many great things, just as Peter did, and just as many of the others that were in that upper room that received that day of Pentecost experience. So imagine these few that travel off to that land and experience this person from a strange and foreign land who's done many great miracles and wonders, then gets deified and venerated there. And that begins to spread. If you follow Mariology and you follow the spread of the worship and cult of Mary, you'll find where essentially it has its origins and how quickly it spreads, and you'll find the spread of that is quite contained for a time to a said area. So it's very clear as to when you see people who don't understand necessarily what happened on the day of Pentecost, they will out of whack. It'll be this one over here is being worshipped because they did great and mighty things, and over here this one, when overall it's very clear that the only one who ever did any great and mighty things for the purpose given, we know, is Jesus doing his great miracles, signs and wonders. These are given the Spirit on the day of Pentecost. They all go out, they all do these various things, preaching and bringing the message of the risen Christ to diverse nations. But there is the beginning of Mary worship. You go far enough back, you'll find it. And yes, why do you need Peter? Well, Peter supposedly is supposed to have the keys, and he might have misplaced them. Now, and that's why I love history. The history of the church, the history of certain things traditionally that people just don't want to ask. You know, somebody asked me, where did the rosary come from? And all you've got to do is trace back, keep going back, and it's strange because a lot of the things that were brought into the church are brought into the church, interestingly enough, through a person I mentioned 1 or 2 festivals ago, Saint Dominic, or Dominic de Guzman, or whatever his name was, but he becomes Saint Dominic, that becomes the head of the Dominican order. He is the one that brings the rosary tradition into the church that prior to that time did not exist. And interestingly enough, if anybody studies comparative religions, you'll find beads, prayer beads of sorts, are not unique to Catholicism. They go sideways as well. There's all these interesting things that if you have a curious mind, you'll want to know.
Come into this house, magnify the Lord, lift up holy hands, our hearts in one accord, worship and bow